Representative Drazkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess my question would be maybe for Representative Hansen. So these are LCCMR dollars, and we kind of know what happened here last year. I think the legislature last year believed that these projects did meet the legal description of proper use for LCCMR dollars. The authors and the interest groups who sued the state of Minnesota instead wanted the dollars to come from somewhere else, and where those dollars are going to come from obviously are the pockets of the taxpayers of Minnesota instead of the lottery proceeds that fund LCCMR dollars. And I think this is an important thing for Minnesotans to understand here. If you're in favor of not having higher taxes, the way that this was funded last year is a better approach. Now, my question for Representative Hansen is, has anyone with any credibility challenged the notion that these projects meet the legal requirements and the spirit of the LCCMR laws and constitutional amendments?
That was a question of you, Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Representative Drazkowski. I think the modifier that you put in there with any credibility is a subjective term. I may view people having credibility. I think we could reference the actual language of the Constitution. So there's the fiscal issue, which you referenced before, where the appropriation bonds are likely to be more expensive than the general obligation bonds. So from a fiscal management perspective, your general obligation bonds are cheaper, less expensive than the appropriation bonds. We don't have the exact number because the bond sale did not occur. In terms of the content, and I don't have the Constitution right in front of me, but in general it has protect, restore, enhance environment and natural resources in there. So I do not believe, and again, I would defer to members who were here when it was adopted, but I don't believe we've broke the seal in cleaning up a hazardous waste dump. My general knowledge on that, and this was before your and my time, reading Willard Munger's autobiography, is that there were certain things that were not supposed to be coming out of this, and that the fact of the statute being drawn prior to the amendment passing gave clear direction so that Minnesotans knew what they were voting on. But I would defer to Representative Wagenius on the actual language.
Representative Wagenius, would you care to comment?
Well, I just would emphasize what Representative Hansen said. There are two issues here: the expense of the bonds, which are more expensive and which are less expensive. But the fundamental and underlying issue is the respect for voters who voted for a constitutional amendment. And when they voted for the constitutional amendment, there was in place already a law that said this is what the money can and cannot be spent for. And so when folks sued the state, it said the base of the suit was the money was being spent for things that when the voters voted for it, they knew the money was not going to be spent for those things, and that's how they voted. So it goes down to the kind of basic respect for the voters and basic respect for the Constitution.
Representative Drazkowski.
Well, thank you both. It appears to me that as I look at these projects and review them, and we had the discussion certainly on the floor last year, each of them are projects that are intended to protect our natural resources. And that's the question I have. Are there any projects in here that don't protect, that aren't designed or intended to protect our natural resources? I think it's clear the answer is no. And so members and Minnesota taxpayers, the proposal being fueled here, if you will, by a far-left environmental group consortium that sued the state of Minnesota, is that they want to have even more and more monies to fund these same things taken from the pockets of Minnesotans instead of having it taken from the LCCMR dollars, where that money has to be spent on environmental protection initiatives. And these are environmental protection initiatives. And so that consortium of groups that came forward to promote their agenda was one that will extract even more money from your pockets to do even more and more and more projects. That, to me, seems to be their intent, because I don't see anything in here in these projects that really is not designed or intended to protect the resources of the state of Minnesota. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Gideon.